Welcome to Body of Light, episode 14, featuring Lama Jinpa, Dr. Asa Hershoff, interview 2. So, second interview with Lama. Wow, we go really deep into some topics that I personally have not heard or seen in writing or in video, specifically around Buddhism, Vajrayana, different types of tantric yoga practices, really any type of spiritual practice specifically tailored to Westerners, and how there can be some dangers or hazards around taking specific practices that were developed by meditation traditions of the East and applying them to people living in the West, in a Western life, engaged in Western affairs. What really is going on there? Is it safe? Is it appropriate? Does it actually benefit people who are living in the West, parents, householders, people working jobs, living in cities, living in a rural life, farming, whatever it is? Are these meditation practices, these tantric practices that were developed in meditation cultures of the East or anywhere, if you go deep with them, is that actually appropriate? Is it actually beneficial to one Westerner's mind, energy, and lifestyle? We go deeply into this. And also, is classical Vajrayana and other tantric yogas outdated? Do they need to be adjusted for Western people? What is a way for people who want to go deep into these practices that work from these different meditation traditions and cultures, spiritual practices from the East? What is a way that Westerners living a Western lifestyle can attain the same enlightenment or self-mastery as people that attain the rainbow body or light body? What could be our way, a way for us? Is it okay, safe, appropriate to take other people's ways and apply them to our way? To take Buddhist ways, ways that were developed for lay people in the East or cave-dwelling yogis, and apply them to our life? We go deeply talking into how spiritual development and psychological development do not grow together. And as Lama says, they are non-converging lines. We talk about dharma monsters related to this, how there can be some teachers and gurus, spiritual leaders in the West and the East who may be speaking truth, who may be helping students with healing and awakening, but they're monsters. They're psychopaths. They have great flaws. We talk deeply about this. We talk about what is the mental psychology atmosphere of one who can attain the rainbow body. What does that look like? And we also go into some of the myths about rainbow body and light body. So this and much more we go into in episode 14. So please enjoy Lama Jinpa, Dr. Asa Hershoff. So, Lama, thank you for being here. I'd like to start with that video from Lauren Roche. Do you know Lauren? I think he lives in your area.
I don't know anybody anymore, so yeah.
Okay, Lauren Roche and Camille Maureen, they wrote the book, The Radiant Sutras. It's this old tantric text that he translated. I had an interview with him and his wife, asking them.
Is he a Sanskrit scholar, or was it in Sanskrit or Tibetan?
Yeah, it's Sanskrit.
Nice.
Yeah, and I asked him similar questions about light body and rainbow body, and I'd like to start with that clip I was talking about, of where
Sure.
he's talking about Westerners taking on different Vajrayana practices and how that can be harmful possibly to some people.
Mhm.
So I'd like to just start there. I'll play you the clip, and then we'll just
Okay.
hear your remarks.
One time in Camille and I were teaching a workshop, and there's a woman in our workshop, and she'd been a teacher, a school teacher in Chicago, studying deep study of Tibetan Buddhism. And the teacher had what it looked like, that she had like a diamond body that was a purple violet that I had never seen before. And there's a doll-like quality. And the teacher had been visualizing her and teaching her these visualizations. And what happened to her is that she became obsessed with the teacher, like that was her primary marriage. And she lost interest in her husband and lost interest in teaching. She lost interest in daily life. And so she was a kind of a semi-nun and floating. And so there's lots of, we could say, hazards or dangers when people take these practices that were developed in the meditation traditions and impose them on themselves rather than discovering what's here. But it's very complicated. And that's how we learn, we live and learn. It's just that the path out from there is not mapped. Like if you spent, say, 10 years doing many hours a day of a fierce Tibetan practice, and you build your subtle body to be a certain way, I don't know if anybody knows, well, what's the path to being able to live as a regular person? Because a lot of the practices intentionally damage your relationship with your desires so that you feel disgusted by food, you're uninterested in friends, you don't care about anything, and you wind up lost. And I've been seeing this for years, just from observation, because I wound up being a quote unquote, like a meditation therapist from 1975 on, where people would come to me, people with 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years of meditation would come to me for sessions trying to figure out what's gone wrong with their health, their emotional health. And I said, starting in like the late 70s, I said, I'll bet the Dalai Lama has opinions about this. I'll bet he wouldn't approve of Westerners just imposing these practices on themselves. Like, because the Tibetans of all people have this sense from Buddha that, because Buddha said one day, like, monks, I've given you 84,000 different dharma doors for all the different kinds of people there are. So for years I've been saying, I'll bet the Dalai Lama somewhere has said that he doesn't think it's a good idea for Americans to just impose this random techniques on themselves, like we do, and I've done. And finally, about 10 years ago, I found such a quote, and I have it. I can send it to you if you want. Where he said, "I don't think it's a good idea for Westerners to convert to Buddhism. You become homeless in yourself." That's what he said.
So the question I asked him was, can Western lay yogis involved in Western life attain the rainbow body or that same level of realization? And that was basically his response. So what are your thoughts, initial thoughts on that?
Well, to address what he said there, which is different from what you just stated, but in terms of the inappropriateness of ancient techniques for a modern crowd, of course, it's a very complex answer, complex situation, but there's certain facts or guidelines which are straightforward and clear. First of all, if he has done therapy, there's not a critique of him, but just taking off from what he said, then he's very aware that individuality is everything in spiritual work as well as therapeutic psychological work. So you cannot make any blanket statements that have any meaning whatsoever. And I don't care if you're the Dalai Lama or anyone else, you can't say Westerners should do this or Easterners should do that. It just makes no sense whatsoever. Everyone is highly individual and has a different constitution, different destiny, different karma, different set of factors. So certainly the problem is that those kind of individual adjustments or individual tailoring of practice to Westerners is not being done in general. It's rare, and I've blogged about that myself. At the optimal level, a teacher should be able to actually tune in to the psychology, to the spiritual state of that individual and make recommendations. step down from that, one should have the psychological training, experience, and wherewithal to make some kind of rational, logical, or intuitive or emotional judgment. So same way with a patient. If you can really tune into what's happening with the patient, then that's as good, not as good. It's not a substitute for, but it gives you additional information to a CAT scan or whatever other analysis, medical, instrumental, technological analysis you might do. So that's really the problem, is that students are accepted holus bolus, wholesale, and even I'm doing a little online course now because they're offering, you had mentioned it too, the Shangpa course, but that's just being offered to anyone who signs up, which is astounding, because even to go into 3-year retreat, there were certain requirements, even though, again, those requirements were not psychological, because does not exist. There's one Dharma center I came across, a Westerner, that he does actually some of the classic, depression inventory and some other psychological testing to see if students are appropriate. But generally speaking, in the tens of thousands of Dharma students, the Dharma centers, Hindu centers, Taoist centers, whatever, I guess there's hundreds of thousands. Nobody's doing any kind of psychological intake or profiling or weeding out people who are borderline personality disorder or psychotic, sociopathic, psychopaths. And so that is the real problem. And part of that, of course, is because it's become a market, a spiritual marketplace. So it's about being successful and making money, having fame and status and wealth, rather than acquiring the patients who need to be there, who ought to be there. Have the 15 students who should be there, not the 7,000 who have no business being there. And, they still might benefit in various ways, but it's just, it's a crapshoot. It's just Russian roulette or Russian roulette. So yeah, some people will, of course, have some serious difficulties. Any meditation practice can drive a person off the edge of psychosis, for sure. If that's where you're heading, it'll accelerate the process usually. And Eastern spiritual teachers, and the vast majority of Western spiritual teachers, do not in any way have the skills to deal with those crises. Certainly the Eastern teachers, I've never seen one. I'll guarantee you. There might be 1% maybe of such teachers who could assess or understand a Westerner's crisis. And when I have seen those crises over the decades, it's okay, do more of that mantra. No. Or do this mantra. No, that's exactly what they don't need to do, is more things which all practices, Tibetan Buddhism, everything is stirring up your lung, your prana, your winds. So the most common illness, or in Qigong, they call them qi deviation or qi deviation, in Tibetan Buddhism, is just simply too much lung, and it's too high. Your energy has come up and it's too high, and it's spinning out, and just you've got a storm at sea. And the therapy for that is stop all of that wind practice and do things which settle you down, to again, in Qigong, they have perfected, you could say that, if it's done right, to be able to settle the energies back into the abdomen where they belong, and create calm, create peace, create relaxation. So that's a major factor right there. But really, beyond that lack of individuality, one has to realize that because of the logarithmic acceleration of culture, we take in more information in a day, they say, than people did in an entire lifetime, even 300 years ago. So that happened very, very, very quickly, as we know. Some empires lasted 10,000 years, and now we've got something that, that things change every 10 years, every 5 years, every 10 minutes. So there's no question that we have to change. We are the, I even use some slides which have pictures of these lungfish, and people go, what the heck's that? The lungfish were the supposedly the first creatures that came out of the sea and came onto the land, and they burrowed under the sand. You can go, they still exist, a very ancient species of fish, hiskies. They burrow under there, and apparently eventually their fins developed into little legs, and they crawled onto land. Gradual evolution is obviously a myth. It's ridiculous, it's illogical, it's irrational. Evolution is always sudden, because things happen by steps, not by gradual. Like one day there's flowers on your plant. It's not like there's an almost flower one day, then now it's flowered. Wasn't a flower before, now there's a flower. One day there's a shoot. So it goes from a seed to a shoot and so on. As far as our phenomenologically, I suppose you could, if you look at it from an atomistic perspective, you could say, oh yes, it's a gradual molecular shifts and so on. But as far as our phenomena, there's a seed, and then there's a shoot, and then there's a stem, and then there's a leaf one day. So things happen by steps. They say that when the Indian tantric practices came to Tibet, were brought to Tibet in the 8th century, Padmasambhava and so on, it took about 200 years with hundreds of translators working to have a kind of a stable Vajrayana practice there. And so we've had maybe 60 years, and our cultures are so vastly different, it's inconceivable. And I probably have not discussed this. When I came out of 3-year retreat, I expected, things will change, fashion will change, people will dress differently, there'll be different books. I haven't seen the news for a few years, so, politics things are different. I was stunned. I was shocked when I experienced that the shape of people's minds were different. The shape of people's minds. And so my mind, which was still 3 years back, I had not changed. I had not melded, molded, somehow morphed with what was happening in the greater culture or the planetary energy. Somehow we were in a time capsule. So when I realized that, and I saw that people's mind were actually, I was a little bit of a square peg in a round hole, not too much of one, but I actually could see that the structure was changed. It just, in some small way, in a 3-year way, people's minds were functioning in a different way. The shape of their mind, I call it the shape, is different. So when I fully understood that, I went, oh my God, Vajrayana is fitting a square 11th century mind into a round hole of a 21st century mind. And that is absolutely true. It's not just that it's a different content, it's a different culture, whatever differentials you might make. No, it's the shape of mind 1,000 years ago and the shape of mind now. It's quite different. So we are the lungfish. That's what I'm coming back to that. Those people that are very involved with practice in some depth and with some change and some profundity to what happens to them, they are the seed. They are the beginners now of a new shape of dharma. So we're just big experiments right now. Sorry, that's how it is. And so I applaud all the people who are teaching the 11th century stuff. That's very cool, but we don't see the results, obviously. We don't see the light body people popping up all over the West or much in the East anymore either. And that's largely because you're using an outdated tool for the job. That doesn't mean you throw the tool away, but you say, okay, I'm driving a 1940 car. Maybe, maybe it needs some hydraulic brakes, and maybe we need to understand, internal combustion better. Maybe there's electricity, you have electric, there's a lot of not only retrofitting, but rebuilding that one has to do. And those analogies are accurate, and people may argue, they may differ, but I assure you this is how it is. So that it makes it very difficult for people who are seriously trying to get along, for example, understand light body, where the teachings are all largely symbolic. Obviously, they're They're not technical in the way that we understand them. Fit part A into part B, and then, turn that crank and so on. The instructions it's kind of reading those instructions, and we always laugh about from IKEA, or they've been translated badly from, Chinese, of how to assemble your table. And there's steps missing, and there's a terminology which we don't fully understand. You understood it then when you had the 11th century context. And it's not linguistics. It's a different way of relating to the world. If you're relating symbolically to the world, or you're relating more directly, phenomenologically, with more intellectual involvement for sure, and less imagery in terms of understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. And also a big deal is that if you spend time, from the first time I went in the 80s, when I went to the first monasteries in India, and you see that these kids are taught Tibetan and taught to memorize, any number of volumes of text, and they're not taught the meaning of those texts till they're teenagers. So 8-10 years, they're just memorizing the text. And then they start to try to understand the meaning. And I've sat there with these kids, who rattle off the, Mahakala text. They're just going a million miles an hour. They don't understand a word of what they're saying, actually. Not a word, because I've talked to them. And so they're kidding around, they're having fun and so on. It's not a critique of that system. In some ways, that's amazing, because when you do want to get serious, or can get serious about it, you have that encyclopedia in your head that you can draw on. But that's not how we do it, is it? We want to know how the damn thing works from the get-go. I don't even want to do it until I know how it works, or if it works, etc. So we're left with many, many mysteries in terms of Vajrayana, in terms of Shaivism, in terms of Taoism. And a lot of Westerners are trying to figure it out, because they're lungfish, and they're trying to establish a new beachhead, and whether they know it or not. And what comes after, or what comes in their next lifetime, or whenever it comes, it won't look exactly the same, obviously, because we have to recall, I don't know why, it's the worshipful part of people, that's lovely, but you have to realize somebody wrote that other stuff. A human being put all that other stuff together that you're slavishly following. And at some point, and now this is a point of extreme danger that I'm talking about. At some point, you take responsibility for the information. It better be way down. I remember when I got out of 3-year retreat, it was Situ Rinpoche who said, don't come out and just start teaching dharma. I took 13 years, 14 years actually, before I taught anyone anything. So I followed his dictum until I thought I somehow digested enough that I could teach. Whereas there are people who become quite famous, start writing books and becoming a great lamas, and we did a retreat. So those great saints, those great sages, whoever it was who wrote all this stuff down, all those lineage holders, I'm sorry, the buck stops here. This is what you got. I remember when my energy teacher passed away, I said, and I talked to a couple other people, that he only had a few students. I had been his disciple for 16 years, disciple, if you want to call it that, a friend. And I said, I guess we're it now. Now we're the next generation. Gee, that's quite a shortfall. That's quite a falling down. But I remember that at some point when I had said to Dr. LaPlante, Dr. John, I said, how could I ever be like you? He said, I don't see a difference. Pretty shocking. We have to eventually, in our own being, be able to realize that the tankas that you see of a dancing deity is not what the dancing deity necessarily looks like. If you have an experience of the dancing deity, it will not look like how somebody painted it according to the Karma Kadri style in 1205, whatever. When did the Karma Kadri style start? Maybe after that. But anyway, very nice style. So at some point, you start being able to trust your inner guru, your inner wisdom, but that has to be way down the road. So that, this is one of the great one of the greatest dangers, because people can either slavishly follow what they were taught forever, that's a dead end, or day one you start jumping off into fantasy, new age bullshit, and then you're also lost. And there's no end of either on the internet and so on. There seems to be two ways that people go. You're either all in with making shit up yourself, or you're all in with not daring to look deeply enough that there's something in you that offers guidance and wisdom. This is not for telling other people, but your own. When you get to the point where, as I say, you're no longer in short pants, and at that point, as in Zen say, when you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. That's what that saying's about. That's not for somebody who joined up last week. That's for somebody who's very advanced, what they call Dzogchen or Mahamudra or some, whatever the Taoists call it, where you recognize that if you say hello to the Buddha, they should say back to you, hello, Buddha. In not as a point of self-aggrandization, but if it's not in you, then it's not anywhere. So that's again, it's a difficult point to even discuss, because it can easily be taken the wrong way. When do you know that you know something? That's a toughie. But sometimes, if you're like me, you're just an arrogant bastard. I tell all my students, I have a little group of students. I told them outright, I said, I'm not a Buddhist, that. And of course they're very happy, because I'm not representing whatever that dogma is. I'm representing dharma, which means truth, the truth that I became, for good or ill. Blame Kala Rinpoche, blame 16 Karmapa. I'm a product. If I'm a Frankenstein monster, it's your fault. You set me on this path, and maybe there was some wisdom to it. Plant a seed and see what happens. If it's a bad seed, we can always cut it, and grow some more seeds. That's kind of how they work in Tibetan Buddhism. You're just a number. Trust me, you're just a number. That's another whole issue. That is a huge issue, another huge issue. But anyway, so my saying is that Dharma beats dogma every day of the week. But how Vajrayana works is that they plant a lot of seeds. The old time teacher, they plant a lot of seeds, and if some don't work, then you just snip that off and you grow another plant, which is another issue we can talk about. But people think they're very special in the Dharma, but actually you're just a number. Really, you're literally just a number. If we need 5 enlightened beings this next century, then let's throw a lot of seeds out there. I was actually doing a little research last night, because I never knew these numbers before. An oak tree usually takes 10,000 acorns to grow one oak tree. And then I was trying to find out information about animals, like how many animals actually live to not to their full lifespan, which might be much longer, but at least to maturity. And the general consensus is it's hard to figure these things out, but among all animal species, about 1% of any species lives to maturity because of illness, predation, you name it, the environment. So I always, again, one of my paradigms is we have to start with the natural world. If it doesn't make sense in the natural world, then you're tripping, man. And with common sense and the natural world. So if only 1% of species even make it to maturity, then as a Dharma student, you're not special. You're just a number. And a lot of seeds will be planted. And like it says in the Bible, some fall by the road and some fall on pavement and some fall on fallow ground. So there you go. You just do your best. But nothing is guaranteed, which comes to light body, of course, as well. We're trying to establish this new paradigm, and we don't know what it will look like. And that's very hard for the paradigmists, is that a word? Because you're following directions, but there's no real map. There's no real map. During those stable periods, during the whole period of, let's say, the 8th century to probably 18th century in Tibet. So they had, a 1,000-year run or something like that. The map was very clear, and you do these practices, you do that, and you go in the cave, and you go in retreat, and you blah, 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 blah. And it worked for the seeds that were good. Still a lot of people didn't make it. And that's okay. That's okay on a higher level. It's not okay for those people, of course, but they didn't necessarily have that concept that we have. Everybody gets a participation trophy. Everybody's important. Well, actually, from a cosmic point of view, maybe not so much. From the point of view of the forest, it's not so important which tree becomes the oak, but it's important for the forest that there is the oak. It's important for the whole ecology, for the animals, the insects, and so on. Which acorn it is, that's not so important. And again, that's maybe people in the military understand that. People who have a higher, but I think people in their spiritual or psychological efforts, because they don't have really an altruistic motivation, they think their way is their journey is so important. Their journey is rough. That's what their journey is. They're trying to, it's very difficult. Spiritual path is extremely difficult. In terms of this being bad for certain people, to say carte blanche, it shouldn't. I can't believe. Well, if the Dalai Lama said that, I could give a damn what the Dalai Lama or anybody else says. Really, that's part of the dogma and dharma. What does it have to do with me? What the Dalai Lama said? It's an absurdity beyond. I mean, it's interesting as listening to Elon Musk or anybody else, but that's for me to put in my little wisdom computer and does it make sense? Is it common sense or not? So should it be dispersed to everybody? No, even though that's happening. Should it be dispersed to nobody? That's obviously ridiculous, because that's the death of all spirituality. Should it be, as is actually, to tell a little secret, as is believed broadly in Asia, should it only be given to Easterners? Oh, I've listened to those discussions in Tibet. No, we can't have Western lamas teach it. We have to export more. It's a big business in Nepal to export lamas to the West. We can't have Westerners, those uppity Westerners. Basically, we're still heathens, the red-faced heathen. We can't have Westerners teaching other Westerners. And the West, even Kala Rinpoche, one of the very first Himalayan, and maybe Dujam Rinpoche or Dilgo Khyentse, maybe he was the very first to put Westerners in 3-year retreat. He was viciously attacked. I mean, he was actually magically attacked quite a bit, as is well known that Shatral Rinpoche spent a lot of his time fending off the attacks, the psychic attacks on Kala Rinpoche for daring to teach like the 6 yogas to Westerners and so on. And believe me, that prejudice is still extant. I think it's worse in Qigong. If you talk to any Qigong people, how do you extract this from Chinese people? They're not even going to look at it. Actually, I had the same experience in Hong Kong when I stupidly walked into a Tai Chi place, and they looked at me. We're not teaching a Western. Get the hell out of here. So, these prejudices, it's not racism. I don't know. It's culturism. I don't think it's race. It's culture. You don't belong to Chinese culture, so, or Indian culture, or you're not one of us anyway. So that's another problem. So all of that is all of those extremes are wrong, and the only sane way to go forward is individually. You assess a person individually. It's like a job interview, and that's what should be happening in the whole of Dharma. And there should be happening initiation, not 7,000 people. We all get the initiation, and you're all going to get it online. I mean, that's completely against all teachings that understand that knowledge is substantial. Substantial meaning there's only so much of it. I really follow the lead of, actually, maybe it was originally through Gurdjieff's teachings, that instead of this idea that everything's energy, no, everything is substantial. Everything is substance. The finest cosmic energies are also substantial. They're stuff, they're not just energy, nothing. Their substance means they're measurable. There's a certain amount of it, and you can accumulate a certain amount. If you attain light body, it's because you accumulated a certain amount of something and you put it somewhere, not just it's all energy, something. Yes, these things should not have been dispersed far and wide. I went into a 3-year retreat because it was the only way you could learn about the 6 yogas. And now you can do it online and you get books and everything else. And it's kind of tragic for the teachings, because it does, as they have always said, they have traditionally said, it dilutes the teaching, it dilutes the substance, because this stuff is supposed to percolate inside you, supposed to cook inside you. And I remember the wonderful Mahasiddha, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, the Hindu guru that many people probably know of. And my girlfriend of many years at the time became a devotee of his. So that was actually what first brought me to India, among also to visit lamas that I had discovered in 1980. But I went to visit her in Bombay and saw Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. And he would give he was a very, very wrathful guy. He was, I love these, to me, they're hysterical. I guess they terrify people. I find them very amusing. But he would say to people that, his students that have been with him for years, what are you doing back here? I already told you the nature of mind. Get out of here. Why do you keep coming back? You just scowl and frown, And the first time I got there, he looked at me and went, it's like when and this is interpreted from Hindi, it's like when you're in the middle of telling a story and somebody new comes in. Now you have to start all over from the beginning again. And this is the nature of mind. And, just 2 sentences. Now get out, don't come back here. Like that. So this is true in a certain sense. And he himself only saw his guru for a short period of time. He got the, deep instructions. And then he just, ran his biddy shops, his cigarette shops for 2 years. And then one day, pop, obviously quite exceptional, but it has to percolate in you, whether you're doing the practice, whether you're not, whatever you're doing, that has to cook inside you for some time. So yeah, that's what that's about. These accidents will continue to happen, and there's quite a few books coming out lately. I notice at least 3 books I know of that are about the dangers of meditation and so on, just because it's not being individually handed out to people, even within Vajrayana. I remember when I first started with Kala Rinpoche, the big thing was, oh, what idam did he give? Meditational deity. Everybody it's like, what's your astrological sign? So what was the meditation you got? That's what deity is the one you're supposed to focus on. So that was the big badge of courage, which deity you would get. And that was your little token, your little pride. But it shows it was individualized. You just go, okay, everybody's following through the program. And in fact, to put that into a different context, when we finished the 3-year retreat, there was, Kala Rinpoche died at the very end of a 3-year retreat. I never got to see him afterwards. He passed away. We were still in. But he did send a last letter just before we got out. And so his last little missive says, now you've accomplished the 3-year retreat. Isn't that wonderful? You've managed to stay. Now what you want to do is pick from this kind of, this yidam, this protector, this one of the yogas. You take those 3, and now you do a 12-year retreat. And you're going, I thought you mean this was just the buffet? This was just a smorgasbord to decide what you want your meal to be for the next 12 years? Oh, I thought we were actually, no, this was just get used to this stuff and see which one really turns you on.
Wow.
So that is many times, yes, there is value in everybody doing the same darn thing up to a point. And then if your teacher cannot direct you personally, then what are you doing there? If they cannot personally direct you what to do next, then, that's just my opinion is, well, you could just stay at that level and just, Mount Analog, by Rene Dumas, Mount Analog, famous book. He was a Gurdjieffian and a terrible drug addict for spiritual purposes. But he wrote a book about Mount Analog, this mountain which one has to climb. And some people want to stay. Oh, they get to a certain point on the mountain and say, "This is cool. This is a great place on the mountain, and I'll just stay here and I'll serve the guru and I'll do this and I'll do this practice and so on." But other people want to go further, and other, get to be less and less people that want to scale the heights. So I'm not saying it's anything wrong if you want to just groove on that level, and that's fine. Maybe you need to do that this lifetime or for a few lifetimes or whatever. But at the same time, if you feel that it's not enough, you need to do is find out personally what you need to do now. And if you need to do that and the teacher can't do that, then obviously you have every right. You're allowed. You have every right to look for a teacher who can do that. It's like looking for a doctor. And great teachers like Chungpo Nalzer, I've got his tongue here somewhere, Kala Rinpoche's lineage, Shangpa lineage, he's renowned for having 500 teachers. And many of the Tibetan teachers, it was quite okay to go to everybody. And Kala Rinpoche himself, I used to sneak out from Darjeeling, because I would stay there for months at a time. I'd sneak out to Darjeeling and take the night bus over to Nepal to see Dilgo Khyentse and sit in his empower. When I would get back, where were you? And I was, hey, what the Dilgo Khyentse? Okay, it's okay to sneak away to do that.
You've met Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche as well?
Yeah, I would. I only had a couple of meetings with him, personal meetings with him, but he was like a bubbling font, like a waterfall. He was constant. He just nothing but constantly giving lungs and wongs and so on. And he talked like a waterfall, just is exactly what he sounded like. And only Matthew Richard could understand him. Even among many lamas couldn't understand him because of his Eastern dialect. I remember one lung, the oral transmission we were getting in this. I forget whose monastery it was in, but they had the classic tin roof, and it was monsoon, just pouring rain on the roof of the tin roof, and you could barely hear at the beginning. Nobody cared. We're just sitting there, getting the energy. I don't even know what wong or lung that was, So yeah, he was quite wonderful. I just had a couple of meetings with him. I just loved him. Yeah.
So you've been in the presence with some masterful beings, and
Marshall Ken. There's quite a few very cool guys. The Zhang Moncontro Rinpoche who died, I was totally in love with him. He's the only man I've been fully in love with. I fell instantly in love with him. When I saw him walk in the room, first of all, I could swear he was floating. He just glided in the room. And it's the only time in my life, I believe, I gasped at a man. I went, because I'm heterosexual, been married, but he was so beautiful and so radiant. It is extraordinary, just extraordinary. Anyway, and every time I go to Nepal, I visit his golden stupa and spend the afternoon crying.
Yeah. So my question for you then is, these beings that you just mentioned and that you've been with intimately, they have a certain quality like you just described with Jiangyang Control. And a lot of them, they don't all have rainbow body signs at their death per se. Some of them do, some of them don't. They all seem to have certain common traits, ways of being, energy, ways of living, ways of the radiance that comes from, like you just described. They have a practice. They have their practice. They have the Vajrayana. They have whatever it is that they're practicing through lifetimes, of course, to get them as a fruit. Like their way of being, when you saw them, is a fruit of a practice, of a way of being. And it seems that many different spiritual traditions have some sort of a light body type of enlightenment, we can say, realization. But in America, us yogis who are practicing, whether it be the Dharma or some other tradition, it seems like we don't have a way to get there per se. We have, I guess, Jesus would be the American guru, right? There's Christianity and but that's still the amount of light body people of Westerners is zero to my understanding. I have not come across a Westerner who has been recorded of having this same level of attainment as these beings we talk about. So I guess my question is now, what's our way? Is it okay to take other people's ways? It seems we do it in a way, like we are using systems that are developed in other countries and other traditions. Is that but does that work? Is that okay? What's our way? How do we find that way, and what is that way?
Well, obviously, a lot of people looking around, and it's a very big marketplace. It's a minefield, and it's many dead ends, many not only dead ends, but false paths, paths which say they are spiritual, but they're designed for augmenting narcissism. That's quite a percentage, actually, of spiritual paths are finishing schools for narcissism. So yeah, it's difficult finding a tradition which you can draw wisdom from, and there's many teachers, and so yeah, it's very difficult in that broad spectrum of finding a teacher who will not disappoint and who has the qualities that will help you. They're not going to be perfect, by the way, because they're human, and but obviously, ethically, morally, we know the lines quite well, so that's not mysterious. There's a lot of bad gurus, and there's a lot of bad students. That's just how it is, and I feel sorry for most gurus because there's bad students, and the gurus don't know how to handle them. Even the good gurus don't know how to handle the bad students. So it's a mishmash. It's quite a chaotic situation, really, if you look at it, in spite of the schools that have thousands of followers and buy massive tracts of lands to build their temples on and enshrine themselves as great. I've spent a certain amount of my life of time involved with Gurdjieff, either Gurdjieff groups or studying Gurdjieff. And even now I'm connected with a certain group that is in that arena for sure. And I remember there was in New York was kind of the epicenter of the Gurdjieffian tradition in America, what they call a foundation group. And when I was in early days, when I was in a Gurdjieff group, and there was one of the very extraordinary people, I think his name was Mr. Brown, from New York, and he was impressive. He had impressive presence. I mean, he was clearly someone who had inner attainments, some level beyond what's normal. And I forget exactly how I phrased the question to him when I caught him on the stairs because I'm, pushy Jew. And he said, I'll never forget his answer. He said, well, the whole of Dharma, the whole of the path is in some ways just growing up. And our greatest problem as Westerners, without an ounce of doubt, and probably it is there in the East now as well, is developmental arrest. That's it. Unless you're grown up inside, essence, growing up, this is Gurdjieffian, sorry, Gurdjieff said it right, so beyond any other tradition, he's the one who said it right. We have persona, which is our cultural self, social self, our conditioned self, and we have our essence, how we were born, our karma, our astrology, our makeup, our potentialities, and so on, basic you. And those two are at war with each other, generally in people. And generally in the West, persona, the false self, the fabricated self, has usurped, as the alchemist would show, somebody has usurped the throne of the king. And now persona is running the show, not our essential being. So unless dharma, and I mean all spiritual path, dharma, unless that enters your essence, there's no spiritual path. If your spirituality is in your persona, the conceptual beliefs, ideas, mannerisms, values that were dumped on you from the flotsam and jetsam for thousands of years of Western culture or wherever you came from culture, if that is where the center of your gravity is, if that's what has captured your thoughts, your emotions, your values, your drives, you're trying to live up to this thing that society gave you, your parents gave you. This is what a good boy, girl, anything should be, and this is how your life should be. This, unless you have, through good luck, karma, or otherwise, centered back on your essence, then all is lost. Frankly, all is lost. It isn't lost forever because you could still wake up and go back to your essential self. And I do teach this, I call it elemental psychology. This is the first pillar of elemental psychology. This is the basic pillar. This is the foundation. Without this, nothing happens. So there's no spiritual path unless it is entering your real being. Because I guarantee you, you will meet, as I have many times, people have been in spiritual path 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. There's nothing. There's nothing happening there except BS because it never entered their being. And there's many teachers. I could make enough names that I'd have lawsuits from now till, the end of time. Great teachers who are just persona based. I don't see any essence. And when I'm teaching this elemental psychology, I say, okay, now here's your homework. You're going to go look at TED Talks. TED Talks are wonderful because you should be able to see within not 60 seconds, within 20 seconds, you go, is that coming from essence? Do I feel something real from that person? I don't mean emotionally charging me up. I don't mean Tony Robbins. I don't mean intellectually stimulating. Is there something coming from them that is directly touches you, that feel? I'm very lucky that I was only once in my life, I was in a men's group where for some reason it was very essence-based. And the minute one of us would start going off into our la-la land, people would drag him back, say, you're bullshitting. Be real, So I did have that experience and then many other experiences which grounded me. And there's a lot of things that can pull you. Actually, if you want to know about your essence, just do what they do in mindfulness. Just be in your body for a second or two. Completely just be in your body, feeling your whole body. Some people, that's very hard just to do. But if you do that, you'll notice if you're really in your body, even for a couple seconds, you'll notice you're not thinking. And you're not that person anymore. You're not Joe, Fred, Jim, Susan, Bill. You're not that person. You're just a presence sitting there in a room. Maybe there's nothing spiritual about that, but actually it's profoundly spiritual. Actually, even energetically, there's a whole shift. So that's what essence is. Maybe sometimes people feel it when they hear some music that they love. Quite apart from this emotional, but that music will bring them into something, not memories of their persona and so on, but it'll bring them into some connection with themselves. So that's the problem. The big problem in Western spirituality is psychological. And as I have said innumerable times and will always say, spiritual development and psychological development are two parallel, non-converging lines. Sorry, they're non-converging. Oh, I meditate. Now I'm a good person. No, does not. I've had teachers, and I know people who meditated in caves for 20 years. And they're monsters. They're criminal. They're sexual predators. They're financial predators. They're abusers of the psyche, of manipulating students. So Ken MacLeod actually had said, The Vajrayana strengthens all of your mind. What a terrifying thought. You're empowering all of your mind, even the horrific parts, which is why traditionally first of all, not everybody's accepted. And secondly, like Milarepa, if you haven't read the story of Milarepa, everybody who might watch, read the biography of Milarepa. He was put through hell and back by Marpa just to purify him, little magician, as he called him. He had to purify. And sometimes, and I'm speaking retroflexively now, sometimes you have to spend a whole lifetime in purification, a whole lifetime. I often think almost everybody I meet is a payback. I'm paying back for my stupidity. All the good that I've done, yeah, it's good, but I owed it back. I'm quite pretty convinced of that, So you might have to spend a very long time in purification. That's just how it is. Because another one of my friends says, gee, I hope I had a really good time doing all those bad things, because I'm sure suffering now. I hope I had a good time. In the same vein, what we could call purification then is not just spiritual purification or energetic purification, it's psychological fixing. And again, another quote. I didn't know I knew so many quotes, but the Gurdjieff said, you cannot start below the level of the obviatel, if that's how you pronounce it. Russian people can forgive me, but is of the peasant who, supports his family by the sweat of his brow and so on. You can't start below that level, which means just being earthbound, common sense, being able to live your life. Not necessarily that he said you can support 20 people by the sweat of your brow, but you can, live a responsible life and be grounded in your normalcy. If you can't be normal, not special, then you're going to be in the wrong tangent. And we have, our culture has created psychological invalids. Most people are psychologically very hurt, very broken, very damaged, and I'm one among them. So that is an area of work that has to be done. And in my forthcoming, eventually coming light body book, that's one of the main components. You don't have, in the contemporary world, you will not have light body in someone who is mentally pathological. When I say pathological, I don't mean the DSM-5 or 4. I mean, all of the self-seeking, narcissistic, self-delusional, self-aggrandizement, neurotic, they just, you could say the garden variety pathology that goes around all the borderline people. Well, our culture has become extremely self-centered, and that kind of is the seed, according to tradition. Even that is the Machik Labdran developed wonderful practice of Cha. Her 4 demons, the main one, she said, the cause of it all, the main one, is this. Basically, the translation is narcissism. Yamje, it's self-centeredness or narcissism is the basis of all of this, and that, that's called, they call it childhood megalomania, and you're supposed to outgrow that. And because of this arrested development, because of schooling, because of culture, because of media, many people do not outgrow that. And as Gurdjieff again pointed out, many grown-ups, their essence is at the level of a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, or maybe many grown-ups are prepubescent, or they're teenagers inside. That's pretty obvious. If you haven't noticed that, just go online, look at the comments, look at all that stuff, but then think about child psychology. Read a couple of books on child psychology or child behavior, and you go, oh, now I know why those people act like that. Watch politics. Holy cow. Are there any of these politicians that are not spoiled brat children that were, in the schoolyard who are bullies or kicking other kids around or whatever? It's sad. And when a grown-up, when you grow up and then you have grown-up powers with your immature mind, there you go. But, as I say, this pervades our society. When our society starts to grow up then it will produce more mature or essence-based people, and then there'll be more of a capacity for real spiritual growth. Because otherwise, it's the basis. You cannot crystallize properly on that basis. You cannot crystallize on a pathological basis. If you do, you'll produce a monster. As I say, I've met them. I'm sorry, I've met dharma monsters, and everybody's heard of them. People who got outed for this and that behavior. But there's lots. There's no problem. You can find them. You'll find them here. You'll find them in Asia. You just, as I say, as many as you can throw a stick at, you'll hit a few. Just throw a stick anywhere, you'll hit a few. So it's problematic. So yes, definitely Westerners can achieve these things, but because our society is extremely pathological, that is become a more pervasive obstacle than it was previously. Not that if you look in the history of humanity, the wars and the barbarity, it's inconceivable what humans do. But nonetheless, even if you read a newspaper from the 1800s, just how people spoke in those days, the refinement and the person's the essence centeredness was much more vivid, much more clear that's where they were coming from. And so now we even take that material and we immediately put it into our persona being, into this inflated false self little bubble that we carry around. So yeah, that is I believe the greatest reason why. The second is why there's problems. The second greatest is, as you can imagine, the number of, I was actually some more research I was doing. How many religions are there on the planet? Actually, some sources were saying 10,000, others said 4,000. But there's the big 5 or 6. But the number of religions which disappeared, the Babylonian, the Sumerian, the Syrian, Egyptian, and don't tell me that we know what the Egyptians were really doing. Some people, yeah, they got some pieces, but no, but I don't see any evidence there is somebody who really is living according to that ancient tradition. And they certainly had light body technology. And the Pythagorean, there were so many religions in Greece and the in Rome, and on and on and on. The number of, and alchemy itself, where are the people who are truly in the tradition of that alchemy? So many lineages broken, even the Hindu lineages. If you listen to Chris Wallace and others, who say that Shaivism was only rekindled in recent times, in the last, in the recent decades, where it died. Actually, all that incredible lineage, that knowledge died by the 18th century or 17th century, 16th. So if you think in Tibet, the diaspora from the Chinese invasion and so on, the thousands of texts. How about the library of the fabled Library of Alexandria? If we think of the knowledge that has been lost, the lineages that have been lost, it's absolutely staggering. So one of the problems is the lineages are so broken and so chopped up. And in China, the Taoism has a worse problem because it was always so secret. You have, thousands. Everybody is their own school, right? At least in Tibetan, it's a little more regulated, Tibetan system, or maybe the Shaivite system. But in China, everybody's got their own system of Tai Chi and Qigong and their own little secrets and so on. And this Westerners has gone around and collected 30 or 40 of those different methodologies that now we could have blobbed together and call Qigong, but it's putting together pieces. So that's a problem. So there's a lot of the lineages we have are broken or partial or are not fully expounded to Westerners. That a lot of Westerners don't realize that. For example, in the Tibetan system, what a Rinpoche is taught and what you're taught is quite different. You might think he's just teaching the stuff that he got. No. And then what a Tulku got is different than what a Rinpoche got. So there is this hierarchical system of keeping certain things back. And even textually, that was done. Certain texts, obviously texts were written in such a way to hide certain information. The Beobum, and some of the texts, actually, the Beobum, you had to combine 3 different texts together to get the full message. And a lot of that information is completely lost. Well, how to be invisible, magical stuff. Actually, Dudra Rinpoche had those books burned. He told the lamas to all destroy all those books because they've got black magic. And too bad. Not that the too bad black magic, but there's a lot of good knowledge there too. So a lot of pieces are missing. And as I said, the language has changed. The way we understand has changed. And who we are has changed. So the only problem is there is an experimental component, whether you think you're experimenting or not. There is an experimental component right now. And there'll be a lot of weird, wacky results. That always happens in a massive paradigm shift. And I don't know if there's never been one as massive as the one we're in now, obviously. It just keeps accelerating exponentially or logarithmically. It's insane. Next thing it'll be AI, and then we're really screwed. We have no choice, like it or not, but to try to pick and choose what really works. We were always warned to not make tukpa, which means soup, Tibetan. In other words, taking all the teachings and mixing them together, and you get a mishmash. But following a tradition, but then if there's something missing in that tradition, like I definitely have taken things from Qigong, and I've studied Qigong, quite a few different teachers now, including Damo Mitchell and others, controversial people, and some mainstream people who are, you could say it's kind of pop Qigong. Nonetheless, there's material in there that the Tibetans they didn't get it. They don't have it. If they have it, they have it, but maybe it's not fully explicated the way it should be. So we don't realize how important that one thing is, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's things within the Shaivite tradition. For example, the Shaivite tradition, they go into mantra and sound, which is 1,000,000 miles beyond what they do in Tibetan. Tibetan's a very simple approach to mantra. And a lot of the mantras are even done silently, which is in the Shaivite tradition, they would say that's not going to do anything because you need that vibration, you need that sound, that resonance in the body. So, drawing from these different arenas of knowledge is quite okay. I don't think anyone does visualization as good as Tibetan. I mean, it's fabulous. And I'm a very visual person, art-wise and so on. So that's okay for me. I like that. When I went into 3-year retreat, the retreat master said, yeah, I hope you like being busy because you'll be very busy. It's not like you're just sitting there chilling and feeling the cosmic vibe. You're just doing practices and visualizations and, using implement. It's so busy. His secret teaching, I'll give you his secret teaching on that. He went, he repeated the teaching. So there's a way to lose your mind by slowing down to nothing or being so busy that one day, it's like a koan. You're given this puzzle and you're going crazy trying to figure out the puzzle, and one day, pop, your head blows open and you have spaciousness again. Does that answer your question? We can achieve light body, but it may not be till death. But it's okay because there's more than one light body. Or there's more than one body, let's say.
Yeah, well, before we get to that, I remember a quote from, I was watching some film, and there was a mountain yogi, probably like a no name no one knows about, but he was being recorded on this documentary, and he was up in the Himalayas somewhere, mountain yogi, and they were asking him something about enlightenment or how to be enlightened, or I think the guy was saying, do you have to live in a cave and do the 15 years and all these things? And he said something like, it doesn't matter if you spend 20, 30 years in a cave, live in the Himalayas, or you live in New York City as a businessman. All that matters is that one's mind is transformed.
And what matters is what fits you. As I say, Kala Rinpoche said, You've done a 3-year retreat, now do 12 years. My thing was, no way. Now, for some people, now it was the son of, whatever happened to him? The son of he was an inheritor of, not Coca-Cola, who was it? Was it some huge commercial fortune in food industry somewhere. But anyway, I know he was in a 12-year retreat, and that was years ago. So if that's your temperament, okay. But for me, that was, no, that's not going to happen. For some people, great. That is your temperament and you can handle it. Being in retreat's not, for me, it's not, that ain't a fun play. That ain't a fun thing. That's a painful, difficult process. And that doesn't mean it's not, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't undertake it if that's your thing. Go do the work, it is work. But for some people, it's just completely inappropriate. And I like what Trungpa did, Trungpa Rinpoche, the late and great, is that when he started his 3-year retreat thing, he did I guess he's still doing it. You do 6 months in and 6 months out. And that makes sense. Yeah, very good, very practical, and get a chance to reintegrate and see how it's going. And hey, maybe if you don't want to continue, you don't have to. But 6 in, 6 out. Maybe it should be 3 in, 3 out. But I guess you need 6 months to really get a flavor, to really get some basis. My Bhutanese fiance / wife, her father spent his whole life pretty much in retreat. He would come out for a few months and go back in for 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, come out again, say hello to the family, and back in. I only got to meet him once. Quite an extraordinary being. A very, very, I found him a very humble man. Wow. Yeah, I look up to someone like that who can do that kind of thing. I ain't got the stones for that. I really couldn't do it. Though I'd like to spend the last part of my life that way. But yeah. And on bad days, I think, yeah, let's chuck this and run away quick. But it's not for everybody, that's all. Some people, but there's no impediment to being in life. That's being a householder's never been an impediment to Tantra, to successfully doing Tantra or Qigong for that matter. And short retreats, and retreats for a purpose, not just because better to be in retreat, but, okay, there's something in me that shows me I got to focus on this. And if I do, or my teacher tells me, you've reached this point, you need to get isolated and get out of the distraction, get out of the hassles of having to make breakfast. Someone who's going to slip your breakfast under the door, will lock you up in a dark retreat or whatever it is. Yeah, then to me, that makes sense. Though, foolhardy idiot like me, I just took upon myself. Actually, the day that I met Kala Rinpoche in 1980, that I walked into his monastery, I remember seeing the gate. I don't know why I was looking at the gate at the time. But the moment I heard about 3-year retreat, I knew I had to go into 3-year retreat. And in fact, his thing was to put all the students that he could into 3-year retreat. So, I just knew that was my karma. I was going to wind up in there, like it or not, past karma. So sometimes that's a reason too. We shouldn't leave that out. You're karmically impelled to do things, even though it's the last thing you'd like to do. As I say, we're forging a very different vision and a different journey. And as I said, the most perfect description of it right now is it's a mess. It's an inconceivable mess of people doing all kinds of wacky things and jumping up and down and different practice and mishmash and bizarreness and dead ends and narcissism and you name it. But of that, something will come out of that. And the rest is just fodder. The rest of those acorns just help the soil to be richer so that whatever acorns can grow, they grow. And I don't care if it's me. I really could, I've stated that many times. I could care less about getting enlightened. It's irrelevant to me. It's absolutely irrelevant. But I'd like somebody to, and I'd like this world to be better and better, or to serve its function, put it that way. And maybe that's a very non-Buddhist thing to say, but since I'm not a Buddhist, And I don't represent, not I'm not a Buddhist, I don't represent Buddhism. I might represent Buddha, but not Buddhism, whatever that means. Represent my inner Buddha. I'd like to represent my inner Buddha. How's that? I'll interview for the job to represent my inner. In my non-Buddhist view, mind-only view, or something like that, we have a cosmic. The planet has a cosmic purpose. The sun has a cosmic purpose. It's very Gurdjieffian, and it's very Christian, actually. There is a meaning and purpose in the cosmos, going back to the original impulse in the original grand endlessness. It's a Gurdjieffian word, he calls it, his endlessness. So for me, that's an important kind of bodhisattva credo as well, is let's see if we can benefit the whole, and however that benefits the whole, whether it's me or the person down the road. If I can help this situation, if a person I teach goes way further than me, great. So.
Something I've realized is for myself and seeing others, it seems like one spiritual practice, it's very personal and very customized, and that there's no, at least for us in America, maybe it seems a little more like this because we don't really have one that is part of our culture, or like a hodgepodge of everything. But it seems like one spiritual practice is something that's very personal and very customized, I guess you can say, to the individual, where they're at mentally, emotionally, spiritually, karmically, where their soul's evolution is. Because I see some of these other American lamas and teachers. For example, I know someone who's done tremendous amount of dark retreat, and he studies with some amazing people, modern and who have passed from Tibet. But he'll post some things on Facebook where I'm like, what did you say? What are you doing? That does, like, wow, okay. So it seems that you can do all the things, and I guess this relates to what you were saying about something developmentally with the mind and spirituality, how like mental and they don't somehow it's different. It's all karmic. It seems like it's karmic, and it's where your soul is determines where you're at and what you're drawn to. Because I'm just going to speak personally for a moment, because this documentary is partially about my journey on this path of discovery about light body and rainbow body, and talking to people like you. I have this great fascination and interest with Vajrayana and with Buddhism and other yogas, and it being introduced to me when I was 9 by my sister, who was my older sister, who's a practicing Tibetan Buddhist. And I've come to this point of doing different practice. I've explained this to you in my messages, like doing kind of my own thing, because I've never really had a formal teacher, and I've never been part of a sangha, and I haven't done a formal 3-year retreat. I've kind of have taught myself and gathered what I can. And I was at this point where I was like, but is that okay? Like, do I have to, what about all these other people doing it this way? And they do these 20 years of retreat, and they're embodying this energy of love. And I want that. Do I need to do that? Or do I do this? Or comparing myself to others. And I guess what I really realized is that it's just, there's no right or wrong with it all. So I guess my point was is that there's no wrong path. If something works, it works. If you feel a connection, or like an authentic connection to a lineage or a practice or whatever, or a person, and that's true and real to you, then that's it in that moment. And it might be that way for your whole life. It might be that way for a year. And I love how you said when you were like, I don't care about being enlightened. And it's almost, I have that same approach. And it's almost, though, interesting when I actually embodied that, it almost like something happened. It's like when you don't care about wanting something so much, then it manifests in a way, whatever it is.
Yes.
It's not really a question around that. I just wanted to share that. That's been a really big ever since we have been having our conversations, something's really clicked for me that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. Is the fact that it's works. It's insisting me with being more of a loving, compassionate, full, authentic human being. And that if it works, it works. It doesn't matter if it's from another culture or
Yeah.
it's from, like you said, like a wrathful monster. I had this purity, like these masters. I saw there should be pure. All aspects of them should be pure and aligned, and no faults, and they should no harm. And then you said something like, I've received some of the like highest teachings and gold from some of the biggest monsters.
I did say that.
And I was like, wow, right. Oh, you said no, you said I'll take whatever teaching I get, even if it's from a
The garbage can.
toilet, or even if it's from the most horrible monster, and I'll turn it into gold.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you said.
Yes.
And I think that's profound because I've been looking for people and these master beings to be like these perfect
Mm-hmm.
beings. And I realize that it's not about being perfect, but it's
No,
about being
the teachings are perfect. And
right.
those people that are carriers of that gold, then you know, I didn't come up with that. I didn't invent that. I discovered that. I discovered that in writings and teachings that the carrier, you know, critiquing the carrier of the teachings gets you nowhere. If the teaching is pure, now you might have to discard that teacher if there's some issues that you know don't want to be around, but they're still carrying. They can still be carrying the gold. You know, I've seen what's the name of the Dorje? What's the name? A teacher in Nepal, passed away recent years. Very famous. I'm sorry, I'm flubbing his name, but what a severe, we would call severe alcohol. I mean, he can drink 5 or 7 or 10 quarts of whiskey in a day. But in his most drunk moments, the man was just a complete clairvoyance and complete insight into your being, and you know, but also when people would come to see, I only spent a little time with him. And one time that I remember was on New Year's, Tibetan New Year's, where everybody would come in and bring him a bottle of whiskey. And Lama Rongbar and I, he said, you got to, you know, because he knew him very well. He said, we have to help him and drink the whiskey. Otherwise, he'll drink all this. I don't drink at all. So it's like, oh my God, I got to drink glasses away. I mean, I can't drink a bottle of beer. I'd be on the floor. But anyway, when people would come in, he would, women would say the most vile things imaginable to them, but in a dharmic construct to just sort of tear apart their ego structure, kind of like Gurdjieff, you know, like rip apart their false persona. And of course they'd be bowing, and he just, but and actually Kunzang Dechen Lingpa, who I did spend a long time with, you know, Chill Master, touring around and went a number of times to Asia to see him, and in Eastern India and so on, Arunachal Pradesh, and touring around America. He loved sexual humor and, you know, shocking people and shocking the monks. And of course, me being a trickster, I got him a fart machine. So students would come and they'd sit on there, and they'd sit, you know, they were very serious and bowing and so on, and they'd sit on there, and the farts were going off. This big fart, you know, you sit on it and it just makes a farting noise. And he had a hysterical time, because for him it was to break down all of these false constructs. You know, they call that crazy wisdom, but really the Tibetan word means yogic discipline, yogic conduct. You're practicing as a realized yogi, where all of the formality of that individual is at that moment is an obstacle to them receiving something. So you're just blowing that away, or shocking them, or sometimes it's terrifying them. You know, Tibetan teachers who, I don't want to name names, who threw people down the stairs, you know, or Zen masters, you know, they're famous for doing worse than that, throwing people out the window and then going, now, you know, look at your mind now. So these are skillful means, but that's not something we can do unless we're in that moment. And some teachers are just very, you know, their nature is not wrathful. They're just extremely kind. And Kala Rinpoche was both, because he was the kindest, sweeting, lovingest man. But when you were in the inner circle, the gloves came off, and you knew you're done, you're finished, you're dead. I mean, he'd look at you. We call it the fisheye. When he looked at you and he looked like X-ray right through you, said, "I'm dead. My game is up. All my ego trips, all my bullshit, I'm done. I'm cooked. He can see everything, and I can't keep it." So this is what a real teacher can do. Is they will fry you. They will strip you bare. And for me, the 3-year retreat was nothing but stripped bare. It was a 3-year karmic detox of being destroyed. It was successful. I was destroyed in that sense. And so, this is not a path that everybody's going to be walking down. And I would say, if you haven't been destroyed by your dharma practice, then keep practicing. You'll get there. You'll be destroyed. All of your bullshit, it will be. I know Gurdjieff used to have his idiot evenings, right, where he was very famously, you can read about them, where he just would go around the room destroying people and calling out things that they didn't know that anyone could perceive, and perceiving it and calling it and ridiculing them in front of everybody else. Not because he was malicious, but because sometimes that wrath is needed to break down all of our constructs. It's not just, soapy bubbles and lemonade and sit in my warm bath and drink my cocktail. Dharma isn't like that. Vajrayana certainly isn't like that. And the practices themselves will do that. Even if the teacher doesn't, the practices will smash you. And so how could you possibly build a light body if you're going to carry all this material with you? So it has to be smashed away. And in a way, you become a simpler person. And you might still be a very complex person, but in a way you're simpler, because all that persona stuff is really convoluted. You're simpler in that you know what's important. I mean, that's pretty valuable. You know what's shit and what's shinola, as they say in New York. You know what is of value and what isn't of value. You're not getting to any of the questions you wanted to ask.
We got 2 of them down. That was 2 questions.
Yeah, 2 out of 10.
Well, we got like 20 minutes or so, Lama. What do you want to talk about? I really want, the other 2 questions were the myths around light body, and then the 4 different bodies.
Let's not talk about 4 bodies, but let's just blow the myth that is one of the myths, that unfortunately there's this idea that is enshrined, or let's say it's part and parcel, it's deeply embedded in all of the light body traditions we know of, that somehow you're going from who you are to pop. Now you're, the chrysalis, now you're butterfly. Nice dramatic stuff, but there might be a lot of things that go on in that chrysalis, or a lot of things that go on in that caterpillar before they even become a chrysalis. And as I said earlier, we can't start from a level lower than common sense and how the natural world works, like the acorns and the oaks. So everywhere we see in nature that things happen by stages and by steps, and in our own life, even if we plan to do something, obviously it's sequential. There's always a sequence, and there's always a hierarchy of things, and it has to be done in a certain order, otherwise it doesn't work. Whether it's driving to pick up your groceries, whatever it is, it's logical, it's orderly, it's so on. That's a sequential world samsaric world we're in. So light body obviously is not here today and then tomorrow it's here. There's obviously steps, and very significant steps, in which things happen. Then you might be on a plateau for a while, growing along, and then boop, now there's a flower, go along, and boop, now there's a seed, etc. Now there's a fruit. So those are landmarks. There's stages. And so light body, when we think of light body as a unitary thing, this is clearly erroneous. And some of the great adepts we may have known or heard about or seen and so on, they still may not be on the final stage where they're going. They might still achieve another couple of 3 levels, who knows. But the initial level that we're trying to reach is really nowhere talked about. Maybe a little bit in Buddhism, they talk about stream winners and, bodhisattva levels and so on, but it's so abstruse. Abhidharma, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. Maybe somebody does, but the Gurdjieffian system, they talk about the second being body, or the Kesjan body. It's a name that he gave us, which is supposedly from his tradition, the Gnostic tradition, or maybe the esoteric tradition. So there's a Sufi connection there somewhere. We don't know where it all came from, but that is a necessary initial plateau where, for me, and again, that's my own dharma. That T-shirt, I am my own guru. If you reach a certain stage where you are a reincarnator, you will have reached the Kesjan body. If you reach a stage where you can reincarnate, then that's the second being body. Second being body is a kind of you've become a unified being instead of a being of multiple. You could say, instead of being a photonic and electromagnetic smog, you have somehow structured yourself to the point where there is a structure that will survive after death. And to a step back, or people might have questions. What do you mean by becoming a reincarnator? Don't we all reincarnate? It's just like the other myth about, don't we all have light bodies? We have the 5 koshas, the 5 subtle bodies of Hinduism, not Hinduism. There's no such thing as Hinduism, but the Samkhya system, or whatever, that the yogic system. You have those sheaths, but you don't have those bodies. You may have those functions, but you don't have the bodies. It's like saying you have the experience, but you don't have the state. You don't have this stable. You have not arrived on that stage, even though you can take some LSD and have those experiences. That doesn't mean you live on the level where those experiences are part of your being, or where they are your being. So I'm very much of the opinion, the Gurdjieffian opinion, that not everybody reincarnates. They're just acorns. You have to really work hard, get somewhere to be able to reincarnate. I call it 30% because unfortunately for people who listen to me, not fortunately for me, I've spent 40 years as an energy healer, and through 16 years with Dr. LaPlante, I know how to tune in, and I know how to listen, and I know how to receive information. Wherever there's energy, there's information, right? They always go together. There's information, there's energy, vice versa. So this information, for me, is 100% accurate. People can throw it in the garbage, whatever they want. For me, it's 100% accurate. It's my reality. There you go. You have to reach a 30% development in this substances, in the inner alchemy. It's an inner alchemy. The first stage of light body development is all alchemy. The second stage I call union. There's those 2 major stages within the alchemy, within the whole process, rather. So if you reach a stage within an alchemy of there's certain substances and certain formation within the body, you've crystallized and changed what is an amorphous blob of energies, or it's not amorphous, it's flowing in the body in various ways, but the psychic substances have to align in such. It's called a body. It's called a light body. That means it has a very specific structure, a geometric structure, a pattern, a grid, a matrix. So if you don't have any of that, you're not born with that, obviously. You're born with the biological. That's it. This is what you got. You're born with a biological, and you're born with potential. A small percentage of humanity, maybe 1%, will actualize that potential and work on it to the point where they are an incarnating being. I think it's 1% is fair. That doesn't mean that only 1% of the people that you meet are those, because if there's millions of people, well, 1% of those, that's quite a few are reincarnating. So I don't know how many in any mix of people, how many of them are reincarnating people, how many people are fresh out of the oven, kind of thing. But that is my contention. So if one does not reach that level, then you're recycled like everything else is recycled. The part of you that belongs to solar energy, the sun, the consciousness goes to the consciousness, as J.G. Bennett called it, the soul stuff pool. You go to the pool to be recycled. It's a substance. The lunar substance, the earth substance, earth to earth, you know, sky to sky, everything's recycled, no problem. And then more beings can be formatted, manufactured. That would be the initial body requirement is already considerable, because now you can reincarnate and continue your work. You can continue on your practice. And some people, I actually have one. He's not my student, but one person I've been talking to. I sell. I make available to people all kinds of dharma implements and so on. So this is how I met this fellow. My God, what a story of, like, since the earliest age. He's one of the few Westerners I've ever spoken to or met that from, age 5 or 6 is like wanting to, when he sees Buddhism, he just goes crazy, and he immediately has all of these reactions and so on, and just wants to do nothing but play with these dharma objects. He's obviously a reincarnated, a true tulku kind of a person, but just struggling like a regular human being like the rest of us, but a dharma practitioner for sure, that doesn't care about anything but dharma, which is probably not me. I've got way too many interests in this funny world. I love learning about stuff, about medicine, about healing, etc. Movies. You can come in, if you reach that level, you can come in and hit the ground running, and you may have, again, what Gurdjieff called a magnetic center. You might have a healthy magnetic center that somewhere in life, boom, you hit it. When I had been studying with Dr. LaPlante for a long time, and I was doing energy work and homeopathy and healing and naturopathic medicine, chiropractic. And I said, I got to find the next step. And I was going through a true, crisis, soul crisis. And I started doing what I tell people not to do, which is spiritual window shopping. But, you're allowed to be a dilettante when you're seeking, so when in the 80s, it wasn't like now. So you had to wait for people to come to town. So like a Sufi guy came to town, and wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. And there were some books on Kabbalah, the few books, whatever there was in the 80s or 70s. I was already starting in the 60s, of course. Had already encountered Gurdjieff in the 60s, and been a seeker a long time, but I was looking for really that something. And when I had gone through these different window shopping experiences, and my motto was, all it is the cost of admission, the time and energy I'm going to take to go there or whatever. So when I went to the Black Crown ceremony of the 16th Karmapa, without detailing that experience, that knocked my socks off, and I signed up for Buddhism. So that's an example of karma or magnetic center that something triggered, and I was back at it. And there's no question in my mind that I've been doing this before. Obviously not so successfully, but I've done this before. So so that is the first body. But even in Buddhist teachings, and as I say in the Hindu teachings, they talk about these various layers and these levels. Even in Blavatsky, not that I should mention her, but the etheric, the astral, the causal, and so on. These are bodies to be attained, not that the big myth is you have those bodies, you have those kosha, you have those things. No, you may have functions, you have an emotional function, but you don't have an emotional body. You are connected to astral energies, but that doesn't mean you live on the astral, you live on the planetary plane. That there is a body that you acquire in which you will now be the planetary body. Now you will basically, your lifespan is that of the planets. If you go further than that, your lifespan is that of the sun. If you go further than that, your lifespan, I say lifespan, I mean, it's not life as we know it, like an amoeba or a bird or something. But our span is that then of the galaxy. And maybe you can only go so far. You're not going to become the source of the source of the source. Maybe we cannot go that far, but we can certainly go on these are different levels, which are again recognized in every one of these traditions does recognize it. But the mistake is taking the activity as the eventual fruition that you have those bodies. You don't have them. And people who are the what they call ascensionists, people who believe in ascension, I'm going to be taken up. Well, that's not different than a Christian saying, "Oh, I'm going to go to heaven when I die," or a Buddhist saying, "I'm going to the pure realms," which, by the way, are again, they're substantial. I don't know. People think heaven is I don't know what they think it is in some other dimension. It might be in some other dimension, but it is in the known galaxy. I mean, there's a wormhole where you can go there. Put it that way. The pure realms are actually pure realms in stellar constellations somewhere, or galactic constellations. It's not some vague mythical concept of a pure realm of a heaven. It is up there in that sense, for sure. I mean, that's our perception, right? We perceive ourselves in this way. We perceive the sun as a big fiery ball of light. It's actually a lot more than that, isn't it? It's a conscious entity. So yeah, so that's it basically. There are those bodies to attain, and there's different practices required. Obviously, if you have the one body and then you go on to the next. The average person, by the way, again, this is my little philosophy. You don't have to accept it, but if you do, I'll give you $5. The average person is about somewhere around 12 to 15. You could say naturally, that's their light body potential or formation, which means they might have a couple of pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and that's quite a far away from 30. And there's people that are deeply in spiritual practice, and there's people I've seen who are spiritual practice for decades. They're still at 27. It still didn't quite hit the 30s. It's a fascinating arena to look at. But again, if you develop those kind of sensitivities, I'm afraid that you can get that kind of information, whether you like the results or not. So that's one thing I certainly encourage people. It's another missing link and an important light body link. If you have not developed sensitivity to energies or sensitivity to your body, you've got to start there. Forget everything else you're doing. Don't do mantras, don't do deities, do them, okay, but you can't really be successful with anyone unless you can sense every part of your body, inside and outside. I remember when I first was in chiropractic college, reading Gray's Anatomy, this gigantic textbook of anatomy, one that was famous for, now I guess it's old-fashioned, but famous for 100 years. And going, I want to be able to experience every aspect of this anatomy in my body. I want to be able to feel every ligament and every artery. I want to be able to go inside and experience it. So that kind of experiencing is very, very important, because even though the internal organs and tissues don't have the kind of sensory nerves of the skin, so we think, well, how could I feel my heart or my liver? A lot of people don't even know where their liver or their spleen is. They really don't. But sensitive energy can go there. Energetically, we have more than just the senses, the sight, smell, and so on. One of our senses is energy sense. I don't know what you call it. Maybe it's an electromagnetic sensor. Maybe I haven't really experimented to see if it's about electromagnetism or magnetism, but it is definitely sensitive energy. Actually, that's what J.G. Bennett called it, or Gurdjieff called it, hydrogen 48 maybe. But this is being able to sense your internal being, not just visualizing it. And I learned that through Qigong, and Damo Mitchell really stresses that, being able to experience it internally, not just I'm visualizing the central channel. You have to have a tactile sense of that, or as much as you can. It's not necessarily easy, but to be able to, in a tactile way, experience energy and sensation of the body, of being in the body, of being present, different body parts, working with body parts, elements, and so on. That's crucial to further light body work. It's not, I don't see how it's even conceivably possible to develop even to level 30%. without that. And in fact, that could be your main practice to get up to 30%, because when you are sensing the whole body, you're putting together, well, if you're doing it the right, you're putting together breath energy. There's another myth I'd like to point out, very important myth in the 3 minutes we have left. Prana or chi is not one thing, my goodness. And I don't mean the 5 pranas or the 5, I'm talking about human energies are a wide spectrum, maybe 8, maybe 12 different energies in the body. It's like saying that it's like some complex machine and thinking it all runs on the same gasoline. That's ridiculous. We have so many different functions, and we have emotional energy is quite different than muscular energy or thinking energy. They are actually different frequencies, different vibrations, and different pranas. So learning to differentiate those one from another is extremely important and very, very useful for our work. And what I was saying was, being able to feel your body, the sensation of your body is an energy, combining that with breath, which is a different energy, and our consciousness or just awareness. That's 3 different energies that you're bringing together. That's alchemy. If you want to start creating light body, that is the alchemy. And you put those 3 together, you're creating fine energies that eventually will come together and create your light form. The beginning of light body is alchemy. If you don't create those higher substances, it's impossible. It is absolutely impossible. How could you? You're going to build a building, but we don't need any wood, we don't need any plaster. We just build it. No, it doesn't happen. You need the substantial energies. So that's what that exercise of just physical awareness, beingness, sensory, just sitting there sensing yourself. Think, well, I'm doing nothing. No. Breath, being in the body, awareness, consciousness, extraordinary. People doing mindfulness, they don't necessarily appreciate what they're really doing. And unfortunately, mindfulness is, it's great. It's step 1, but usually people think that's it. I mean, it's great. You've accomplished step 1 and you're really good at it. And you can accumulate those energies. Now what? You have to know what to do next.
Empty. There ain't nobody. Illusory, transform to rainbow body. Clear light shining, calmly abiding. Great perfection, rainbow body. Empty. There ain't nobody. Illusory, transform to rainbow body. Clear light